You don't go blank because you have no feelings. You go blank because somewhere early, feeling them in real time stopped being safe. By the time you notice sadness, the conversation is over. By the time you notice anger, you already said yes. By the time you realize something hurt, you've explained it away. You've protected everyone else from your reaction before you even met it. That delay can shape an entire life. It can make you look calm, mature, easygoing, and deeply disconnected at the same time. People may call you thoughtful because you pause before speaking. But sometimes that pause is not wisdom. It's emotional customs clearance. Everything has to be inspected before it enters consciousness. Is this allowed, useful, dangerous, selfish, dramatic, inconvenient, or likely to upset someone? So you don't feel in the moment. You process later, alone, in the shower, on a drive, at 2 in the morning. And when the feeling finally arrives, it hits with a strange sadness. Not just because it hurts, but because the moment to protect yourself has already passed. That pattern usually didn't begin in adulthood. It began in rooms where your feelings were too much, too ignored, or too risky to express. Maybe nobody asked what you felt unless your answer was simple. Maybe your household had problems bigger than your inner world. Maybe there was tension in the air all the time. Maybe someone's mood filled the house, and your job became adjusting to it. In homes like that, children become emotional weather readers. They learn to scan the room before they scan themselves. Who is upset? What tone is safe? What expression will keep things steady? What part of me needs to disappear right now? That is not emotional shallowness. That is adaptation with excellent survival skills and terrible timing. You learn to notice impact before feeling. You learned consequences before sensations. You learned other people's comfort before your own reality. So when someone asks, "How do you feel?" your mind does something odd. It doesn't go inward first. It searches for the acceptable answer. Fine is quick. Tired is safe. Busy is useful. Anything deeper feels unorganized, exposed, and suspiciously expensive. Not because you are dishonest, because honesty used to create pressure you were never helped to carry. So now they narrate facts instead of feelings. They can tell you what happened in perfect order and still have no clue what it did to them. That is why delayed emotion can feel so confusing. The body knows before the story does. You get a headache after seeing your family. You feel exhausted after helping a friend. You feel irritated all day and call it stress. Only later do you realize it was grief, or resentment, or loneliness, or the old ache of being needed but not known. They were loved most when they were low maintenance. So now their internal world still treats need as a possible threat. That is why you can look incredibly self-controlled and still feel internally late to your own life. Moments happen, and your emotions arrive after the credits. You may even mistake this delay for being rational. You tell yourself you just need time to think. Sometimes you do, but sometimes thinking is the hallway you pace in so you do not have to enter the room where you actually feel. Because feeling in real time means vulnerability. And vulnerability without safety never feels cleaned. It feels dangerous, embarrassing, and hard to contain. A child who had to stay composed becomes an adult who confuses composure with identity. They do not merely act collected, they feel morally attached to it. So anger feels ugly, disappointment feels ungrateful, hurt feels childish, need feels like an unfair burden you are placing on someone else. This is where the pattern gets expensive. Not dramatic on the outside, but expensive in the quiet ways that drain a life. You said nothing. You said nothing. You says caught. You said nothing. You says conversations feeling strange, then blame yourself for being sensitive. You become the person who can handle it. The person who understands, forgives, adjusts, and circles back later with a softer version. But that softer version often leaves out the truth. It leaves out the part where something actually mattered to you. So your relationships get your diplomacy before they get your honesty. People may think you are easy to be with while never realizing how much you swallow. And swallowing has a cost. What goes unspoken does not disappear. It turns into tension, distance, numbness, fatigue, and private resentment. Sometimes it turns into crying over something tiny. Not because the tiny thing caused it, but because your feelings finally found an unlocked door. That is why you can overreact to small moments and underreact to big ones. The system is not broken, it is delayed. You might freeze when someone asks what you want for dinner. Not because the question is hard, but because wanting was never a simple thing. Wanting meant risk. Wanting meant someone could sigh, mock, withdraw, or tell you there are more important things to worry about. So now even small preferences can feel strangely loaded. You say whatever is fine while your body quietly disappears from the room. Or someone offers help, and you instantly say no. Then later, when you are alone and overwhelmed, you feel the heaviness you refuse to name. You are not rejecting support because you do not need it. You are rejecting the shame attached to needing anything at all. This is common in people who became competent too early. They learned that being useful brought stability, while being overwhelmed created more chaos. So they got good at handling things before they got good at feeling them. They learned performance before reflection. But inside, something starts to split. The person everyone trusts becomes the person least practiced at hearing themselves in real time. They know how to stay functional in stress. They do not always know when stress has become pain. They know how to show up for emergencies. They do not always know how to notice emptiness before it turns into burnout. This is why some people only realize they were unhappy after they have already left a job, ended a relationship, or broken down in a parking lot. The clues were there. The body was whispering for months, but the mind was still trying to be reasonable. You do not want to accuse someone unfairly. You do not want to make a scene. You do not want your feelings to become another problem. So you wait for certainty. You wait until the evidence is overwhelming. You wait until even your own self-doubt can no longer cross-examine you. But feelings do not always arrive like courtroom proof. Sometimes they arrive as a flinch, a tight chest, a flat voice, a sudden urge to leave. When you are not taught to trust those early signals, you override them. You keep the plans. You answer the text. You agree to the favor. Then later, the truth shows up with interest. Now you are exhausted, irritated, and ashamed that you did not speak sooner. Then you feel guilty for finally reacting. You think, if I say something now, it will seem dramatic. So you stay quiet again. And the cycle repeats, with your silence becoming evidence against your own needs. There is another layer to this. Some people were not only ignored emotionally, they were also relied on emotionally. They became the listener, the peacekeeper, the mature one, the child who could handle adult atmospheres without making them harder. Those children often grow into adults who can read everybody except themselves. They sense tension instantly, but miss their own hurt until it becomes distance. But when they are the one who feels off, they go foggy. They become intellectual, patient, oddly unavailable to their own body. This is not because they are cold. It is because self-attunement was never practiced under gentle conditions. No one slowed down and helped them name the smaller feelings. No one taught them that irritation, confusion, disappointment, and fear all deserve language before they become explosions. So adulthood becomes a translation problem. Your inner life speaks in signals, and your conscious mind only recognizes emergencies. That is why you may say, I don't know what I feel, when what you really mean is, I was never taught how to catch it early. And catching it early changes everything. There's the difference between resentment and a boundary, collapse and rest, shutdown and an honest sentence. But many people only know themselves at full volume. They understand anger once it becomes sharp, sadness once it becomes tears, exhaustion once they can no longer move. Subtle emotion is harder. It asks for listening, and listening feels unfamiliar when your childhood trained you to monitor instead of notice. This can show up in love in painful ways. Someone kind comes close, and you do not know whether you feel safe, overwhelmed, grateful, or suspicious. So you smile, keep things pleasant, and say you are good. Then later you feel a heaviness you cannot explain. Maybe the kindness touched a place that still expects conditions. Maybe being cared for woke up grief you usually keep sedated with competence. Because receiving can be harder than giving. Giving lets you stay in control. Receiving asks you to feel the ache of what was missing. People who live in delayed feeling often stay busy for emotional reasons. They would never call emotional. They say they just like being productive. Sometimes they do. Sometimes productivity is simply the most socially rewarded form of not noticing yourself. Stillness removes the distraction. Then unprocessed disappointment starts knocking, followed by loneliness, followed by the deeper question you keep outrunning. What have I actually been feeling all this time? And how much of my personality was just adaptation with good manners? That question can hurt. It can also be the beginning of self-respect. Because the goal was not to become more dramatic. It is not to feel everything instantly and perfectly and never get confused again. The goal is to become less late to yourself, to notice earlier, to betray yourself less often in the name of staying easy to love. And that starts with small moments, not grand declarations. The pause in your chest when someone interrupts you. The fatigue after a family visit. The relief when plans get canceled. Those moments matter because they are honest before they are polished. They are your system telling the truth in a language softer than words. And if you learn to mistrust that language, you will probably need to slow down before you can speak it. Not because you are weak, but because speed helped you survive. You may need to ask yourself strange little questions. Did I go quiet because I was peaceful, or because I disappeared? Did I agree because I wanted to, or because conflict still feels bigger than it is? Am I tired, or am I carrying feelings I never made room for? None of this is instant. People who were emotionally delayed in childhood often become emotionally patient with everyone except themselves. They think they should know already. They think adulthood should have erased the confusion by now. But self-knowledge is hard when your early environment rewarded self-erasure. Of course, it takes time to hear a voice you were taught to lower. So if your feelings often arrive late, that does not make you broken. It means your inner world learned to wait until it was safer. And maybe the real work now is not forcing faster emotions. Maybe it is building a life where your feelings no longer have to miss the moment to be allowed in. A life where no is not cruelty, where need is not shame, where rest is not failure, where confusion is not weakness. A life where you can notice hurt before it hardens, where you can notice anger before it becomes distance, where you can notice longing before you call it nothing. Because there was never nothing there. There was a child learning to stay manageable in an environment that did not always know how to hold a full human heart. And many years later, that child may still be living in your timing, still delaying the truth until the danger seems gone. But being late to your feelings is not the same as not having them. It is what happens when your emotions were taught to knock softly in a loud house. So the next time it takes you hours or days to understand why something hurt, do not mock yourself for it. Do not call yourself cold, difficult, or impossible to reach. You may simply be meeting an old pattern with new honesty. You may finally be hearing yourself before the silence turns into a life. And that matters more than most people know, because the moment you stop treating your delay as a flaw, you can start treating it as a message. Not a sign that you feel too little. A sign that for a very long time you had to feel carefully,